Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Joshua Prue from the Alumni Relations Office here at UConn. I'm thrilled to be here today to join you as we continue our month of career and professional development and get into a crucial aspect and topic in today's workplace, all about psychological safety in the workplace. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Caitlin Krause, Samantha Morris-Avery, and Kristen Luger. And together, we've been your go-tos through this month for all things careers. And we are thrilled that you're joining us today. Today marks the 6th event in our series under our moniker, Elevate Your Career Next Level. We're bringing you a month long of efforts and series of events to bring you career and professional development in any facet that we can think of. So thank you for joining us. If you've missed any of our previously done events, you can find access to the recordings at youtube.com/UConn alumni. Before we get started today, I just want to, before we turn this over to our panelists, I want to just mention that closed captioning is available, and one of my colleagues is actually dropping the instructions to the closed captioning into the chat right now. So if you wish to utilize this service, please visit your toolbar on your Zoom toolbar there, select the CC option, and activate your subtitles. Second, the chat is open. Please feel free to drop it in where you are logging in from. We always love to learn where our alums and constituents are logging in from these. We get a great opportunity to see where UConn Nation is around the world, and this is a great place to do that. So if you want to let us know where you're coming in from today, we'd love to see that. We also ask you to utilize the chat throughout the program today. We're going to encourage you to chime in with different pieces throughout the program, but we do ask you to just please remember to be kind, be courteous, be supportive in your dialogue, and to please keep your conversations topical. We're all at different stages in our own growth and development when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that is no different for today's discussion. So we ask you to please just be respectful and thoughtful. Next, should you have questions, we're asking you to please utilize the Q&A section on your toolbar. We realize the chat function is easy, but in order to make sure we get through all the questions, please use that Q&A section on your toolbar. We'll gently remind you if you drop a question into the chat to drop that over there. This way we can make sure that we get to all those questions that come in today and don't miss any along the way. Last, today we are recording this program. So if you do have to jump off, take a call, grab lunch, pick the kids up from school, whatever it is, we will make sure that you get a copy of this recording as long as everything goes well and technology approves or takes care of what it needs to do today. So we'll get that over to you. And we also will be uploading that to our YouTube channel, which I mentioned earlier. That being said, let's meet our moderator for today, who'll be guiding us through this incredible discussion and this rockstar panel we've assembled for you. Dr. Katie Burton is a public humanities leader and educator committed to access and empowerment. Her work in museums, nonprofits, and higher ed emphasizes not only the power of narrative and community building, but also about using language, literature, and history to move individuals and systems towards racial justice. She is the head of communications and grants at Keeler Tavern Museum and History Center, where she helps to reshape reinterpretation efforts with an emphasis on community engagement and developing more inclusive storytelling and site history. She's also the founding chair of the Diversity Committee for the New England College of Sports Medicine, where she provides nonprofit administration direction. She also serves as the VP of Board of Connecticut Fair Housing Center, where she supports the center's crucial civil rights work and advocacy. And she also has previously worked as a program manager with Harriet Beecher Stowe Center, where she created innovative student-teacher education and equity programming initiatives focused on race and gender. She currently comes to us today as the co-founder of Drakes and Burton Consulting in 2016, where they kicked it off. Katie, along with her co-founder, worked tirelessly to provide tools for instituting positive change through education and facilitation that include powerful strategies for not only promoting anti-racist action among both individuals, but also systems. In addition to this work, she's received facilitation training with Sites of Conscious, Recenter, and the Center for Reconciliation. She is a proud Husky. She holds a PhD in English with focus in literature and social justice from Lehigh University and an MA and BA from the University of Connecticut. Katie, mouthful. Hopefully I did that in under 60 seconds as I try to do. I will throw it over to you to lead this panel and we will get off the screen here.
That was perfect. Thank you, Josh. I'm really excited to be here and to help steer this conversation. Josh, I think you covered everything. I'm particularly here with my Drakes and Burton cap on, racial equity in practice. We focus on using history and literature as a lens to help move people to action and create racial equity. And so I want to first start by giving our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. So I will turn it over to Christina first.
All right, thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Edwards, and I'm the founder and CEO of C3 Career Consulting, LLC, which is a virtual career consulting agency that's designed to help women and people of color truly maximize their career potential. So in my 9 to 5, I work in corporate America. I'm a full-time global diversity and inclusion consultant. But in my 5 to 9, outside of work, that is really where I do the work of helping the community with this career consulting business. I really started it because I didn't see enough people that look like me in professional spaces, and I wanted to be able to change that. And I wanted to focus on underrepresented communities, low-income populations that don't have the tools, resources, or funds to be able to get to the next level in their career. And so that's just a little bit about me.
Thanks very much. And David, would you like to take a turn?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Embrick. I'm an associate professor in Africana Studies and Sociology at the University of Connecticut, and I'm also the director of the Sustainable Global Cities Initiative at UConn Hartford. Most of my areas sort of center on issues of racial microaggressions, white spaces and places, as well as diversity in workplace. In fact, I've been researching diversity in workplace since early graduate school years in 2000. So it's been quite a while. I've tried to navigate my way out of that realm many times, but it just keeps coming back because there's no end of issues when it comes to sort of people, I guess, not really clearly thinking or understanding, or even kind of interrogating the word diversity and what it actually means. So that's a little bit what I do.
Excellent. All right, and so the way that we're going to structure the conversation, we're going to start with a little bit of defining terminology, so we're all making sure that we're working with a shared language and you see kind of our approaches to how we're thinking about these different topics. And then we'll have some discussion. I have questions that I'm going to pose, and what we would love, obviously they'll be directed to Christina and David, but we would love if you all watching would maybe think about those questions, how they apply to your own lives. And if you have anything that you think speaks to that, you could certainly put that in the chat so that we get a sense of where everybody's coming from in those experiences as well. All right, so I'm just going to start and share my screen for a second. As I mentioned, Drakes and Burton, my consulting, we focus a lot on language and history, historical context as a way in. And so these terminology here comes from some of the programming that I do with my co-founder, Aqua Drakes. And then we'll have some additional language that I'm going to ask David and Christina to speak to a little bit more. But just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page when we're talking about different things. So when we're thinking about psychological safety, we're going to be thinking about it, how it acts in two levels. We're going to think about it systemically. And when we're saying systemic, we mean the complex interactions of large scale societal systems, practices, ideologies, programs. So we're thinking, for example, things like schools or laws or housing. And these systems are often designed and implemented to produce and perpetuate inequities, designed on purpose, intentionally meant to give power to some and keep power from others. And we're going to be digging into that and thinking about how systemic factors are at play in the workplace. And then we're also going to be thinking about relationships on an interpersonal level, and that's where we're talking about beliefs, attitudes, and actions of and between individuals. And these actions, obviously, attitudes, beliefs can support and perpetuate inequities. And also, really importantly, those things can be conscious or unconscious. So we can be aware of what we're doing and how we're acting and engaging with others. And we also could be completely unaware. And so a lot of what we talk about when we think about trying to create spaces that support DEI are making people more aware of the forces that are at play, right? The systems that are in play and the interpersonal, the interactions that we see and how those are affecting people around us. We're also going to be talking about microaggressions and psychological safety. And so some shared language here. Daryl Wing Sue is a professor who coined the phrase microaggressions to start. And I will be, in just a couple of minutes, asking David to give us a little bit more of his perspective and way into thinking about microaggressions. But a way to think about these is these are everyday slights, indignities, put downs, insults that members of marginalized groups experience in their day-to-day interactions with individuals. And I think David will be explaining to us too, and with systems. who are often unaware they've engaged in an offensive or demeaning way. These microaggressions can be verbal, they can be behavioral or environmental, and that's kind of that systemic level as well. One way to think about a microaggression is thinking about a paper cut, right? One paper cut doesn't hurt. If you have somebody says something hurtful or does something hurtful one time, it's not a big deal. But when you're experiencing thousands and thousands of microaggressions over a lifetime or a week, then they become life-threatening and create trauma. And then psychological safety, which is really the core of what we're going to be talking about today. Amy Edmondson is the professor who coined this phrase to begin with. And psychological safety is about the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. It's also the ability to take interpersonal risks on a team without fear of blame, retaliation, or other negative outcomes. And so I'd like to just pause with these two terms for a minute. And Christina, if we could start with you, and I'll stop sharing my screen too, but if we could start with you and you could talk a little bit about your approach and your way of thinking about psychological safety.
Yeah, so you pretty much nailed it, right, when it comes to psychological safety. Like, it's really just being able to bring your full self to work and being able to take interpersonal risks without fear of, being retaliated against, blamed, or feeling like you're going to be humiliated for something. I'm sorry. And so actually, one thing that kind of digs a little bit deeper on psychological safety is some studies that have been done. So Google actually conducted a study. It's called Project Aristotle. And they wanted to test, how many organizations actually have psychological safety and what are the effects of that. And so they found that after studying hundreds of organizations within Google, the ones that have said that they had a psychologically safe environment were the ones that had higher retention rates. So more people actually wanted to stay in that organization. More people had more productivity, right? And that yielded better business results as it pertains to revenue and all of that. And so it really just shows that psychological safety is a top indicator of high performing teams. And that's really what studies show. And so we're going to be talking a little bit more about it today, the differences between psychological safety and psychological danger. And I hope that you all are able to take a little bit more away from that to know, am I in a psychologically safe environment? And if I'm not, how do I address that and get out of that situation?
Perfect, thank you. And then, so David, I know microaggressions, you said a large part of where your research is. And can you talk a little bit about your framework for understanding microaggressions and how they'll relate to our conversation about psychological safety today?
Yeah, sure. I want to go back and sort of recap a little bit about what Christina said. Obviously, psychological danger is when you feel like you can't do these things at work, right? Whether it be in a leadership meeting or a cabinet meeting or meeting between coworkers or clients or in work in general, right? So you feel like you can't be your full sense. Your true self, or you can't bring your true self to the table as a legitimate employee or member of the group has valuable perspectives, ideas, or comments to offer. And I think there's a lot of reasons why someone might feel like they can't be their true selves or participate as a full member. But they range, right? So the range is from kind of one extreme, such as overt hostility from other members of the group, or even leaders of the group, right, that serve to delegitimize a person's right to be part of a group or be seen as a valuable asset to the community at large. To what you had just mentioned about microaggressions, whether it's intentional or otherwise, that communicate to target people that they're different or they don't belong. And I think that may also communicate to the dominant group that this person doesn't belong or these people sort of don't belong. These microaggressions, whether we're talking about racial or gender or something else, and I think you mentioned this very well, is they're cumulative, right? And that's, there's consequences to that because they may seem like, I think you mentioned a paper cut, but they're cumulative over time. That is detrimental. That's a deleterious health effects to folks that are exposed daily to microaggressions. And the thing that I think that a lot of people aren't aware is that, if you're thinking about sort of racism, sexism, homophobia, those kind of issues of inequality as a larger system, you have to sort of recognize that people are born into such a system and they face these cumulative racial microaggressions daily. So by the time you get to higher education, for example, by the time you get to high school, by the time you get to college, like you've already faced a lifetime of daily microaggressions, depending on your position in society. If you think about the workplace, you've already faced this. You've already faced this perhaps as a student in a classroom or walking down the street or trying to find other employment. So you've already got thousands and thousands of paper cuts before you even get to the workplace, right? So sitting down in a team meeting and facing maybe not overt hostilities, but sort of racial or sexual or gender microaggressions isn't that one-time cut, and it's not even a cumulative cut while you're working for that particular company, but it's a cut that's built upon years and years and years of other cuts, right? And it brings to mind sort of maybe hostile memories, right, or racialized memories or gendered memories of events that have taken place in the past that maybe allow you to sort of think through why you wouldn't want to say, because you've had these experiences, you don't want to say something, or you don't want to do something, or you don't want to feel like something in this particular room, and it's dangerous to do so. And I also want to say, and we'll talk about more of this probably later, but the thing about psychological danger and particularly microaggressions is that they don't need to solely be about the ways that individuals, people, for example, are targeted intentionally or unintentionally, again, by other people or even by the group itself. It's also about how comfortable we feel in expressing ourselves, again, bringing our full selves into the picture, whether it's about problem solving or programming or simple discussions about how to change an organizational environment without fear of being ridiculed, dismissed, minimized, ostracized, or otherized, right? So it could be about the environment that you're in, that you feel like you don't belong in this environment, right? I'm in this environment, but I'm the only person of color. I'm the only woman in this group meeting. So do I feel comfortable in expressing, my full self to the table, especially in light of things that I've been experienced in the past, right?
Yeah. I think this is really helpful, David, right, for people to understand when we're talking about someone being an employee or manager or whatever it is, that there's context and fullness to who that person is, right? It's not just how they're showing up and their role in the workplace, but they're bringing with them their experiences, whether they're biases or their previous trauma or experiences with microaggressions, right? So we have to really think about employees as and all of us as whole and complex people with a lot of different things, right? Not just that sort of surface level interaction. And I wonder, Christina, too. So we've been talking a lot about the idea of psychological safety and how people can be sort of impacted, especially thinking about systems of inequity, right? So if we're thinking about racism or sexism, homophobia, or religious discrimination, disability, all these different things. But I know that you also focus on, like, sometimes there are just bad bosses too, right? And can you talk, just like fill that out just a little bit more about that sort of component of psychological safety as well?
Right. So I want to take a step back to kind of talk about the differences between psychological safety and psychological danger. So you can see like the different examples to be able to identify that, right? And so some differences between that with psychological safety is being able to openly share ideas, being able to take risks, to be able to admit mistakes and to learn from failure. So an example of a good boss, right, is that learning from failure piece. Just say I made a mistake, I messed up on the team, I got some numbers wrong or something like that, right? A good boss would say, I understand the mistake is made, right? We're all human, we all make mistakes. Is there anything that you learned from the situation? What would you have done differently? And how can I help better support you so we can make improvements moving forward? That's a good boss. They're not pushing blame on you. They're not going to sit here and just dwell in that moment and go below the line, but they're going to say, how can we be productive in moving forward? I hear you. I understand you made a mistake, but how can we learn from our failure and have that growth mindset, right? A bad boss, which is, psychological danger, right? That's fear of admitting mistakes in the first place because you fear that you're going to be blamed or retaliated against, right? And the other one that I think is very interesting is called the common knowledge effect, or kind of like groupthink. When there's a certain individual where they're so intense, they're just scary, right? Where you have to agree with them, because if you don't, they're going to blow up. They're going to, point fingers at you or get angry with you or humiliate you, right? And so an example of a bad boss is someone that says, hey, I think that we're going to do this tomorrow, so this is what our meeting is going to be. And everyone else, they don't want to be that outlier, right? So they're going to say, I agree with him. Yep, that's the right decision, right? Because everyone is scared to think differently. Everyone is scared to not have that common knowledge effect or that group think, because they know this person or this boss is known to be someone that blows up or will retaliate against them if they say something opposite to what they say. So that, I would say, those are the differences between the two. And that's kind of a little bit of an example of what a good boss looks like with psychological safety and what a bad boss looks like with psychological danger.
So I'm thinking about I don't know. So I find like really specific examples helpful, right? So have either of you had a time where you've taken a risk to speak up and be open? Maybe Christina, we can start with you again, to provide your feedback on an issue and it went well, right? You felt like you were in a space of psychological safety, or conversely didn't, and experience that psychological danger?
Right. So in my previous role, I was a chief of staff to the vice president of HR at my company. And pretty much we noticed that there was a lot of attrition going on in the organization that we supported. And so we wanted to be able to go to the president of that organization and talk about the attrition. And so although I'm just a chief of staff, I'm a lot lower than the VP of HR, I felt comfortable enough to take a risk and say, hey, I think we shouldn't just look at attrition overall. How about we dig deeper and look at it by gender and by ethnicity? Because just saying, oh, people are leaving the company, that's different than no, Black women are leaving the company, right? Because once you're able to kind of pinpoint the specific population, that's when we're able to create change. So I propose we show metrics specifically for gender and ethnicity, but we also create an action plan on what we're going to do moving forward so we can hold our leaders accountable. Now, that was a huge step because we did not do that before. Like, that was something that wasn't done. That's not what that specific culture had in that organization. So I just raised my hand and said it. And a couple of things that I noticed from my leader, which I knew it was a psychologically safe environment. Number one, he promoted self-awareness. So he was able to say, listen, I might be the VP of HR, but I don't know everything. So I'm open to different ideas on how we can move the business forward. So that promoting self-awareness was key. The second thing was being able to ask for feedback and include your team on decision-making. So he also said, I'm open to your feedback. I want to make sure that your ideas are heard. So what do you have to share? Let's kind of work and collaborate together. And then the third thing was just modeling that it was okay to make mistakes. He said, Christina, I know that we've never done this before. So we may get pushback because sometimes people are not open to change, right? Or we may get scolded by the president because he's like, what are you doing? We never did this before. But he said, just know that if we make a mistake or if we do something that doesn't seem as favorable, I'm going to stick by you. I'm not going to blame you or make sure that you're outed, from different individuals, but I'm going to stick by you and say, no, we agreed on this. And we're going to approach this from a one-team effort. Whereas, I've had other situations where I would go over different scenarios or presentations with a previous boss, and pretty much he understood what we were going to do. We had a game plan, but when we got in front of individuals and the VP of that particular organization questioned me, he didn't have my back. He didn't say, oh no, me and Christina talked about it. Like we're one team on this, we're aligned. He, in fact, agreed with the VP of, yeah, why did you do that? Knowing that before we previously talked about it. So you can kind of see the differences between the two, where I've had a supportive supervisor that created this psychologically safe environment, that had my back, that said, I'm open to if you make mistakes and open to your feedback. But I've also had someone who actually made me feel like I didn't belong, right? And so those are kind of the differences between the two with some real examples.
Yeah, I saw David smiling too, but that example you give of the leader who like pivots and turns on you and all of a sudden you're the scapegoat for a shared bad idea. I feel like that's very familiar, right? I wonder how many people in the audience are that's resonating with. And this is a moment too, I think, for everyone listening, if you're thinking about times or qualities, right, Christina, that was really helpful to think about, like modeling and self-awareness and inclusion, right, bringing people to the table together, some different qualities that sort of signals the person who's creating psychological safety. So if people who are listening have noticed any other qualities or things like that, and you want to contribute that to the chat or think about it as a question, I think that would be really helpful, sort of help it create a list of what we're looking for, or conversely, what we're not looking for. David, do you want to take a stab at that and give us some of your thoughts about when you felt psychologically safe or not?
I'm going to say a series of things that are going to, I hopefully does not make me look like the nutty professor. And these are general thoughts, but I think it kind of showcases the complexities, right, of this. And I'm going to start off with a story that probably doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but I'm going to try to sort of link into it. So I was a young professor. Well, no, I was on a job market way back. This is, coming out on the market maybe 2005, and I remember, this was for a job at a comprehensive university, and when you're, or maybe you don't know, but I mean, anyone that's trying to go for a job interview, there's a lot of nervousness and things like that. And so we're going to dinner, and I remember being primed, and like you shouldn't order the highest meal on the on the plate, but and I remember being tense. This was my first interview, and the chair of the department that was at dinner, basically just, he saw people were uncomfortable, and he basically took a stab, and he said, "Look, I don't know what everybody else is doing, but I'm ordering a lobster, and I'm not only ordering one lobster, I'm ordering 2 lobsters, and I'm going to eat it right here. So you should all order lobsters, but if you don't want to order lobster, then don't do it. But I'm going to order 2." Right now, I say that, and it seems very kind of irrelevant to this because it's not really necessarily about psychological safety, perhaps, but I say because it's really the only instance that I think that I have as an analogy to coming close to anything that Christina may have brought up, because I don't feel like in my lifetime I've really been in a position where I could truly be my true self. Now I want to complicate things, like I said, because I am also aware that I'm cisgender male. And I have advantages in a society that gives privileges to men, cis men, right? And I've noticed, I mean, I've been in workplace settings in which my female colleagues have basically expressed to me, outside of that context, where they have felt intimidated, where I did not feel intimidated in certain aspects. But at the same time, like, I've also been in those situations where I've also felt that I've been marginalized, minimized, and not taken seriously. So it's really hard. I mean, I don't want to be the pessimist in the room, but I think from kind of the position of where I am at, it is for me, or it has been a struggle every day to kind of feel out where I'm at, and whether I can say what I really want to say. And I'm not talking about just saying willy-nilly. I'm talking about, in terms of the team context, in terms of making the group dynamic better, for moving forward on projects or on programming or on development or on those things, to think of us as doing better. It's been a challenge. Now, I do kind of recognize, and I certainly appreciate the things that Christina said. I see those as kind of like we talk about good bosses and bad bosses, or good dynamics and bad dynamics. I think the group that has people that listen, that serve as listeners, right, and that really critically listen, where they don't, where they're not doing so in a defensive manner, or they're not doing so in a way that's going to create a legitimacy or delegitimize who you are or your thoughts as a person in the room, but they wear careful consideration, and they deliberately take into account everyone's comments or thoughts, are going to be those situations that I've been in that I feel more comfortable, right? Going around the room and asking everyone for their thoughts on a particular matter, and waiting patiently while the person thinks through, and then responds with something that's in the affirmative, before moving on, before even making a dynamic, decision based on what you said immediately, but going around and those kind of things, right? That serves as a real good listener. So again, I don't want to be a pessimist, but I want folks to sort of realize that it is a challenge, and it depends on your position in society. If you're a Black woman in a group dynamic, you're faced with several challenges in terms of systems of oppression, gender and racial oppression, as well as the type of microaggressions you might face that I, coming into a situation, may face that may be completely different, right? And we sort of have to recognize that. So just my quick thoughts.
No, I mean, that's excellent. And I think it's really powerful. And I just want everyone to sit with that for a minute, right? To hear what David is saying about never fully feeling like he can bring himself to work, right? It's really striking. I'm sure there are many people in attendance here who have had similar experiences, and others of us who maybe don't, right? And I think conversely, David, I think a lot about my whiteness and how that influences my ability to navigate spaces. And in fact, my business partner, who is a Black queer woman, and I talk really intentionally about when I can use my privilege in a place that she can't, and do that really intentionally, right? So navigating workplace dynamics and recognizing that as a white lady, I might be able to push a little bit more or make a fuss a little bit more. And have that privilege where others who I'm working with are not going to, and trying to use that very strategically, I guess, to navigate systems that don't work. I don't know, Christina, do you want to weigh in on any of that, respond to David at all?
No, I really loved what you said about kind of leveraging the fact that you may have advantages or privileges in different ways, and how can you be an active ally? There's a difference between someone saying, I joined an employee resource group, I'm an ally, and someone that actually uses their privileges and makes sure that they stand up for other individuals that may be facing microaggressions and things of that nature. So I just wanted to say that I'm loving listening to this discussion on what you were talking about so far.
Yeah. I'm also wondering too, I'm just trying to populate this idea of psychological safety and danger. It seems to me, right, we can focus on the individual boss, and I think it's helpful to focus on the individual, but we also need to be really attuned to how how that boss is supported in their creating conditions, whether they're for safety or harm, by systems that are in place. David, I was thinking about this as you were speaking as well, right? That you could have a great boss, but if you have a workplace system that doesn't support inclusive practices or psychological safety, it's not going to go anywhere. And if you have a bad boss and you have no recourse in the system, or in fact that boss is doing exactly what the system is trying to get that boss to do, you're not going to have recourse. I don't know if either of you want to comment on that at all, sort of those layers of boss and system. I can maybe ask that in a different way. I guess what I'm trying to do is bring together this idea of where the dynamic, and because later on we'll talk about action, right? But how these conditions for psychological safety and psychological harm don't just exist in one bad person, right? It's also always incorporating the system, I guess. Sure. Right?
Christina, did you want to go?
I'll let you go first. I'm pondering on that one.
Yeah. No. It's a very important question, and one that I sort of, I'm a sociologist by trade, and so I think kind of beyond the individual into sort of the large group dynamics, right? Constantly, and one of the challenges for me as somebody who studies microaggressions, I don't study it from I understand the kind of psychological viewpoints that are out there, but I study it from a sociological perspective of microaggressions. We can think of them as, on the one hand, and I think I mentioned this maybe earlier, as these something different than the kind of overt acts that we think of. So on the one hand, they're often minimized and rendered invisible, right? So we can see somebody who's really angry and makes a remark, or says something about you, that we can sort of handle. But the microaggressions are those kind of sometimes invisible acts that we tend to dismiss, or at least the dominant group tends to dismiss as just joking, as contested, as taken out of context or hand, or flipped in a script, right? That blames the victim by bringing this up or that up. You are the problem, right? But on the one level, that's the individual level. That's talking about people, and that's what Daryl Wingfield Sue does really well in terms of talking about going into a workplace and facing these kind of racial microaggressions at the individual level. But what happens when you sort of look at it in terms, or takes a step back in terms of the institutional context or the structural context of racial microaggressions? Like, what happens when I go into a workplace and I don't see anyone that looks like me, right? That you tell me that you're interested in diversity and inclusion, but as I sort of walk up, the higher levels, from the entry level positions and higher, and it becomes more and more white men, right? And I may be the only person of color that is often asked to speak on behalf of my group or my gender, or something, to that effect. Or what happens when I walk into an environment that I don't see any way of not just people that look like me, but the ability to see myself in those kind of positions, or to see people coming after me in those positions in this company, right? Going into, probably can use universities as better examples, but also in the corporate world, you go into this environment and there's statues of people who are, big donors, and, that are supposed to represent the campus or the organization, and they all end up being sort of white men, right? Even if they're not problematic because they're not former slave owners or things like that. But we don't, the way that we walk into the environment is not just about, well, I don't see people that look like me, but I don't see people who I feel like we celebrate, that have contributed to society in one way or another, have contributed to the organization. Surely there's massive donors that are people of color or women that have given to universities, given to organizations. Why aren't they represented? So those kind of things. But also even other controversial things like, say the Confederate flag. Walking into an environment in which I see symbolic representations of historical hate. Now, you can have whatever debate that you want to really have about whether the Confederate flag is or isn't, but I think that really depends on your position in society. If you are a person of color, and especially if you're Black in the United States, there is a long legacy of hostility attached to the Confederate flag. So if I'm walking into the workplace, and especially if I'm the only Black person, a person of color, and I have to see this image every single day, that's going to cause some serious physiological reactions that are going to affect my workplace. It is going to create a dynamic in which I feel like I'm in a hostile environment and I can't fully contribute to conversations in an environment. And then of course, bringing it up and being and having words or effects or comments that reduce it, you're just taking this out of context. You don't really understand history. That minimize or create diminutives to it. Only sort of create microaggressions that kind of put me, like the cumulative microaggressions that put me in a place of more fear, right? And a fear of retaliations. If I continue down this path, no matter how much I think I need to really address it to feel fully safe at this work, I could jeopardize my job. I could jeopardize my friendship with my colleagues. I can jeopardize my relationship with the team, and thus reduce kind of the cooperation in the team, right? So I think thinking about it in all these levels in which we think about it, it's not just about people, but it is about institutions. There's a great piece, if you're really interested in reading, there's a piece in American Sociological Review written by Victor Ray, R-A-Y, called Racialized Organizations, in which he talks about the tenets of how organizations at the meso level, the institutional level, are really, they're gendered, they're racialized, and they're set up. And real quickly, I mean, the other way that I could sort of think about this, if you really want to kind of, this is I guess a scenario that I can bring up, when I talk to my students in, say, an introduction to sociology class, and we talk about making changes, right? And a lot of these students are from the College of Education, and they're great, right? And maybe they take my class, or maybe they take another class, and they come into my class and they're saying, I love teaching kids, and I recognize the oppression that's out there, and the dominant systems of oppression, and I want to make a change. I want to make a real change. I'm going to go gung-ho heavy. There's all kinds of things I want to do. I can't wait. And if you're if you're trying to be a school teacher, I mean, one thing I'm not going to bring up is whether you truly want to be a school teacher, like whether you're, because they don't get paid a lot of money. So your heart had, like, I don't question people's intentions about being a school teacher, but you had better know that once you get a job, no matter what, like you're now in a system, no matter what you've learned or what you think you're going to do, once you get a job in the K through 12 system, your ability to make change is really governed by kind of an institutional foothold that doesn't really allow for change. In some respects. Now, I'm not saying you can't do it, but I'm saying if you're going in there, are you going to make a curricular change when the curricular is decided by a group of body or the state? No. Are you going to do things that's going to affect your job because it's by seniority and you could be the first one fired? Really, no, right? Are you going to be able to do things that you want to do? No. So another way to approach it, if you see it that way, is to do it collectively, right? These larger collective kind of changes. And I sort of equate it to the workplace. You can have a lot of great people. You got a great boss. You can have, but if everyone buys into the idea that the policies and rules and regulations and the way that the corporation is set up or the academic institution is set up is the right way, you're going to be really challenged to change those practices, right? Or policies. So. Yeah, long-winded, and I'm sorry about that.
No, that's great. Go ahead, Christina.
Something else that comes to mind, I mean, even at the company level, like at the company processes level, right?
Yes.
If you have an individual where, just say it's a white male and he's angry, he's yelling at folks, they say, oh, he's just very passionate. He's just really passionate about what he does. But then if you have a Black woman and she's in the same type of position and she's, showing her same passion, right? Now she's the angry Black woman. And you can kind of see how like those microaggressions or kind of like the misconceptions of different individuals and how they kind of make one person with one identity seem one way as another person with another identity seems another way. And so I think, at like the company process level, if you have different companies that don't have a process for individuals that are retaliated against, just say there's some companies that don't have a process in place. Like just say you get retaliated against from your boss, they do something because they're angry at you, right? And there's no process, you're going to very much so be in a psychologically dangerous environment because you feel like, number one, I can't bring my full self to work. I can't make any mistakes. I can't do any of this stuff because there's nothing that's going to happen if this person retaliates against me. I may just lose my job, right? But if you have other companies that have a process in place where we say we have 100%, zero retaliation policy. We have ombudsman where you can anonymously report individuals. We have EEO, which is equal employment opportunity investigators, that where, hey, if there's microaggressions happening or misconduct in any way, you can go to these investigators, right? We have an ethics organization, right? There are some companies that don't have those simple things in place that can make a tremendous difference. And so I think that, really when you look at your own employer, really see what processes exist at your company where if, God forbid, if things were to happen, can I go to the right individuals and connect with those right individuals to make sure that I don't lose my job for speaking up for myself if I don't belong or if I'm retaliated against in any way?
Right. Yeah, no, I think, and that's, Christine, I think those are really helpful ways to think about some of those. We have to institutionalize it, right? Like it's not just enough to rely on people to do the right thing or to know the strategies to being a good boss or to navigating difficult bosses, but they need to be built in and institutionalized, right? In the company's policies and practices. I'm thinking of an example. This is a big conversation in the museum field, which is my background, and thinking about how to sort of really shake up the systems that are already in place. And one of the things that we've seen some organizations do really successfully is who they're bringing to the table and how those people are identified as decision makers or not. But it's written into bylaws. It's written into different policies and practices, right, at a museum. Like if we're going to make this kind of decision, who needs to be here? It's not just going to be the board. And it's not just going to be the board and the ED, right? We need to bring in community members, or we need to make sure that we have frontline staff who are in on the decision making, who get to have an equal voice or something like that. So really writing it into those policies. I wonder if conversely, and going back, Christina, thinking again about some of the ways that you've identified the psychologically safe environment. Can you talk a little bit about how some of those things might be written into the code, right? Institutionalized in an organization. So self-awareness, inclusion and discussion, decision-making, modeling. Are there ways that that can be baked into the system in a workplace?
Yeah, something that comes to mind where it's not all on HR and D&I, right? But me being an HR professional, kind of being in the profession for 10 years, you really need a strong HR organization, because those are the folks, and legal, right? Because those are the folks that are really going to get together and collaborate and decide what makes the most sense for the organization, what issues are we seeing, and what policies and procedures do we need to put into play to make sure that individuals are supported, that they are treated fairly, that we have equitable, procedures and outcomes and all of that. And so I would say having a strong HR organization that can really view those issues and that can really create processes like what I was mentioning around the ombudsman. Like if you don't have a process in place for people to anonymously report, some people are afraid to raise their hand and say, I'm in a psychologically dangerous environment, this is what's going on. So having that anonymous reporting feature is something that is truly key. Something else that comes to mind is also being able to have a specific D&I consultant organization. And I say that because I'm a D&I consultant right now, and I've noticed that this is a newly created role for the company that I'm in currently, and it has gone a long way. There are so many people, so many leaders that come up to me and say, I'm scared to say the wrong thing. I don't want to offend my employees. What should I do? What should I say? So having that support along the way where you have professionals that can kind of go through scenarios with you, that can give you resources and best practices on how to make sure you don't say microaggressions, how you're checking for your unconscious bias, and how you effectively address those situations in the right manner if things do happen to your employees. That's something that's definitely key.
Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you. Again, doing consulting as well. Find that consultants sometimes have a lot more leverage. Because I don't know, Christina, one of the things that I've seen a lot is HR. I've often seen HR fail, right? Have failed people who are in psychologically dangerous environments, people who have come in different ways, because I think in one way or at a core, HR is there to support the company, right? To support the systems that are in place. And so that seems it seems at odds with or in tension with DEI efforts that are trying to dismantle or trouble or push back on systems that create inequities. And so creating a position that's outside of HR, whether it's a position within the company or bringing in someone from the outside kind of to be like the troublemakers, often creates a more conducive environment to really interrogating that, right? Because I've seen a lot of situations where there are microaggressions, there are psychologically unsafe conditions, and HR adds to the trauma or adds to the experience. I don't know if that's something that you've seen as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why it's key to kind of ensure alignment, within the HR or D&I or your consulting team prior to going out to leadership, prior to going out to employees and everything. Because if you are not, at the end of the day, you're all seen as an HR organization, regardless if you're a consultant, you're in D&I, you're in HR, right? You're supporting employees and their development and them feeling like they could bring their full selves to work. And so, one thing that I do as a career consultant for C3, I actually talk with employees about, this is what you should recommend to your HR organization, or this is what you should say to your boss. If your boss doesn't hear you about being in a psychologically dangerous environment, everybody's got a boss, right? Go to your boss's boss, right? But making sure that there is some type of alignment, because if not, you're going to see that conflict on the front end, right? If you don't agree about it on the back end first, before going out to the broader company.
I don't want to step on your toes, Katie, for moving.
No, please.
Forward, but I do want to sort of bring up. Maybe these aren't caveats, but I do want to kind of bring up the idea that it, again, and not in a challenging way, but in a way that sort of, again, creates complexities, necessary complexities, right? Because And I think I saw in the chat, maybe someone or there were questions about like, what should you do? Or maybe that's a question that's coming up, like, what should you do if you confront, microaggression? But here's the thing. I think for some people, like it's really hard if you're the only person of color, if you're the only woman, for example, in an organization, in a meeting, and you're expected to contribute. The fear is such that if something does occur, right, it's not as easy to think that you can go to, let's say forget the leader, but that you can go to some part of the organization, even if it's anonymous, right? Because if I go and I report it anonymously, I am the only woman or I am the only person of color, right? It's not too far-fetched to think about previous experiences about how people are going to gravitate and say, okay, well, obviously that came from that person, right? So it's really not as anonymous as you think. Or at least that could be a feeling or perception, right? That some people have. It's like, well, what does it mean? Yeah, I can go to the ombuds person, but what does that really mean? And can they actually do something, right? And so I want to go into kind of like the importance of accomplices, right? And again, we can differentiate between, and I think this was brought up by Christina, differentiate between allies and accomplices. I'm thinking about some of the studies that I've sort of remember in terms of, how do we know that racism exists in organizations, right? There's a concept called New Racism by Eduardo Bonilla Silva, in which he talks about like, the old Jim Crow type overt, in your face, apparent racism is no longer the case these days, where we've sort of, as whether you buy into it or not, like we've sort of pitched ourselves as progressive, right? That we're beyond race. And so, we can't go in there and get data on racism in organizations, but we still have data. We still know it. And we know it because, we've had white accomplices that work for companies that have recorded sessions. And I'm thinking of one in the housing industry, a housing organization in which they recorded, some of the leaders expressing, their dissatisfaction or their dislike of Black people and why they shouldn't be in this community or that and that. And so they record it, come out, and then all of a sudden we have data, right? And so I think it's really important that in these meetings that we, again, I always think about sort of the full equation is one that in which we consider both the individual and the structural, right? We have to consider both facets. On the individual level, I think it is important that we kind of recognize that we need people to step up, right? And so, if a racial microaggression or if a hostility or something happens in that situation, that the burden is not on the person that it was directed to, but that the bystanders that are there, the people that may not be going along with what's going on, but they are also bystanders because they don't do anything about it, and then thus perpetuating, that they are the ones that feel comfortable about saying something, or if they're not comfortable in that setting, again, because they could also face psychological dangers, that they're the ones that go and report it to HR or something like that, right? And the difference is, for me, there's a really cool piece written by an indigenous scholar called, like, we don't really want allies, like we want accomplices. We don't want people that say Black Lives Matter. We don't want people that say we care about diversity and inclusion. We want people that are on the front lines fighting, for rights of everyone, that are going to speak up, right? That are going to be, and aggressively so. And so I think that's also kind of an important consideration. So, even if it's not applicable to you as a person that faces microaggressions, that everyone sitting here in the audience can think about those times in which they probably should have stood up and said something, or would have been really valuable. That would have changed the group dynamic immediately, right? So just some thoughts.
No, absolutely, and you're right. That was definitely something that I wanted to make sure that we talked about it in just a little bit, but I think it makes sense where you bring it in here as well too, right? That all the impetus for creating change or identifying these situations shouldn't fall on the people who are experiencing the danger or the trauma. And again, we have to build those systems, put them in place to support that. I'm wondering too, and this is just before, because I'd like to move us into starting to think about more of like those action strategies, kind of like what you're talking about, David, about how to build coalitions of accomplices, or even thinking about things like affinity groups and support groups and ways that to work outside of or around systems, or to navigate the systems that are in place. But I would just wonder, I think too, I don't want to assume that everybody understands or is as familiar with what microaggressions might look like, or some of these other factors of what might create psychological danger. And I do feel like we've been able to focus a bit on what racial microaggressions might look like. There are millions, but I wonder if we could try and identify some others. I'm seeing some of that coming up in the chat or the questions too, of some other examples. And Christina, maybe I'll let you talk about this, have you talk about this for a little bit, but other kinds of microaggressions or conditions that are creating that psychological harm in that environment. I've got a couple that I've experienced, I'm thinking of, and I'm happy to throw in, but I'd like to hear what you have to say first.
Yeah, I will provide maybe like a couple of just like broad examples, and I'll provide a personal story if that's also helpful to kind of paint a better picture of what microaggressions are. So one microaggressions is just say someone is from the AAPI community, and you ask them, where are you from? And they say, oh, I'm from New Jersey. No, where are you really from? And it's like, I'm from New Jersey, you know what I mean? And so I think that's definitely a microaggression, because just because I, am from the AAPI community and, I have this is my ethnicity, does not mean I'm from China or Asia or things of that nature, right? That is definitely a microaggression. Something else, for example, is just say, it's a Black male and he has to present in front of a bunch of leaders, and he says something along the lines of, like a leader after he presents says something along the lines of, wow, you speak very well. Like you present and you speak very well. That's another microaggression. Why are you saying that I speak very well? Because I'm a Black male and you didn't expect that from me, right? And so that's another one. And then another one that comes to mind, which is a personal example, when I was an intern, I was an HR intern. I started off working when I was 19 years old, and there was another person, and her name was Christina Edwards. So her last name didn't have the S. Right. And so a lot of people would email the wrong person because our names were pretty much similar. And as I was talking to another HR professional, she said, oh, yeah, I was talking to someone about Christina Edwards and Edward. And I said, oh, no, not the regular Christina with the wild hair. She was referring to me. And this individual, she was in HR, and she felt comfortable to saying this white woman, she's the regular Christina, and I'm the wild one. I'm the one with the wild hair, right? Another thing that I was told when I was an HR intern is that I don't look like an HR professional because I don't straighten my hair. And so in order to look like a professional, I need to be able to straighten my hair if I want to be taken seriously in the workplace. And so as a 19-year-old, I straightened my hair because I wanted a job. I didn't really know what psychological safety and psychological danger was. I didn't really understand microaggressions. I was very I was very naive and young, right, and immature at that point, and I thought that's what I had to do to keep my job. And so at that moment, I did not speak up. But as you can see today, here's Christina with the wild, I'm gonna make sure that every single platform I'm on, every single time that I present, I am going to wear the hair that naturally grows out of my head, because that does not define my work ethic. By no means does my hair define who I am. And those microaggressions made me feel like I could not bring my full self to work. And so just because I didn't respond in that moment does not mean that you can't respond moving forward to stand up for yourself, but also other individuals to come. And so I made sure that I became a subject matter expert in different forms of HR. So you still had to come to Christina that was not the regular one, right, by societal norms. And so that's just a couple of examples of microaggressions. I mean, hopefully that helps paint a better picture of the differences between all of them.
Yeah. And I'm thinking also too, right, different kinds of inequities, or thinking about, for example, somebody is asking that coworkers or a boss use a specific set of pronouns to refer to them, right? I prefer they, them pronouns, and that person, their boss is constantly misgendering them, right? Using he all the time instead of they, them, right? It's a simple thing. Somebody's asking you to call them something, just do it. I'm thinking about something like access or disability, right? Maybe somebody who needs captioning for image content, and their boss is consistently sending them things or having them engage with things that's not using that, right? So especially after a need has been stated, right? Ignoring that change. I'm thinking of this because somebody in the chat had mentioned like consistently ignoring emails, and I think that you see a lot of microaggressions that come up that maybe the first time was an accident or an oversight, or you could say, oh, it's not really part of anything else, but then you realize, oh no, this is intentional.
Right.
Having somebody, if I'm in the room with a male colleague and having a supervisor consistently directing their questions to the male colleague instead of me, right, is a microaggression. So it's all these different microaggressions are all these different ways that your authority or your value are undercut, and most of them are based on systems of who has power and who doesn't.
Right.
And again, not always conscious, right? Like many people don't know that they are microaggressing others, but and this is part of where I think Christina earlier had been talking about like training and support so bosses know like what to say and how to do it or not, right? But once you're made aware, that's when it needs to be more conscious and intentional as well. Right. Okay. So thinking of that sort of concept. Go ahead, David. Did you?
No, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of it. I mean, I have countless examples. I mean, it's nonstop. I mean, it can be anything from, prior to academia, I sort of worked in as a truck driver in a big goods industry, and I remember just the tons of racist and sexist jokes that were going on in mostly male-dominated areas, right? In which I was made uncomfortable, and what do you do? Like, what do you say, right? I remember being dismissed at lots of faculty meetings when I became sort of an academic. I'm not just a sociologist by trade. Methodologically, I'm an ethnographer. I spent countless years doing ethnographic research in corporate America, and I remember being in a faculty meeting. It's my previous institution, and we were hiring someone to do who was to be an ethnographer and teach ethnography classes. And I remember the chair asking questions of my colleagues and just basically skipping me, right? And I'm sitting there and I was like, this is what I do. Like, this is my main, but asking everybody except for me. I remember, folks thinking that, again, this is not about intention or otherwise. I think we're socialized into the space that, we're born in, we grow up in, and we have primary contact with in terms of institutions and people. But I remember colleagues. I remember, when I got hired in another instance, a colleague thinking that it was okay. They came to my office and started speaking Spanish to me. So I was like, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. Or, another person took me to, a Mexican dominated neighborhood to show me like all the great Mexican things, right? I've had people ask me what it feels like to be the only brother in the department. I've had people call me chief, right? This, the kind of racial ambiguous features, like they, but they feel very comfortable in thinking that they're correct. Or, I can think of the times that voices are minimized, or, when we look at how men feel like they can mansplain, or, being rendered invisible, but also being asked to speak on things because you're deemed the expert as a person of color, or as a woman, or as someone who has disabilities, or the things are countless. I love that the fact that you brought up accessibility. I think accessibility is a furthest thing on a lot of our minds, and they need to be. I have had the displeasure of having taught graduate courses on the fourth floor of some rooms in which there was no access, and you have students that definitely need access, and it's like, well, whatever, we're grandfathered in, we're this or we're that. But it's made to kind of, they're basically, their needs are rendered not just invisible, but outright dismissed, right? As if it doesn't have any meaning to the needs of the dominant group, which should come first, right? So there's lots of ways to kind of think. And again, I don't want to keep rehashing, but I do think, again, this is beyond kind of the individual level, interpersonal, right? Person to person, because it's also about the lack of representation, right? Coming into a situation in which I feel uncomfortable. I don't want to be in this place. I don't feel welcomed or included in this place, right? So yeah.
Yeah, someone in the chat is also bringing up age as a factor, which I know is a serious issue in workplace dynamics as well. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes, and I want to make sure that we're thinking about action strategies for everyone who's listening too. And maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but I'm thinking about this in sort of like 3 buckets, right? Like we have the people who are the bosses, who are the managers, and thinking about what they can do to provide psychological safety. We have the people who are experiencing psychological danger and need to know how to navigate that and act on that. And then we have people who are not directly experiencing the psychological danger, but are seeing it happen and what they might do. And so, Christina, those are sort of like the 3 buckets. Where do you want to start? How can we act?
Let's start with the individual experiencing it. I feel like that's probably the worst place to be in, when you actually feel like you don't belong, you feel like you're being targeted. And so I want to take some time to address that first. The 2 things I'll say for any individual being in a psychologically dangerous environment: speak up and educate. When I say speak up, if you're experiencing that, go to the right people that can actually help you, that can stand up for you, and if you could take corrective action. And so speak up to your HR business partner, or to ethics, to EEO investigators, or equal employment opportunity is what that acronym stands for, as well as your boss. And if your boss is the one doing it, your boss's boss. Everybody has a boss, right? But making sure that you're speaking up to the right individuals to be able to take action and help you in that situation and support you. Another thing is to educate. Education is key, right? And so you can educate in 2 different ways. You can either respond immediately when that situation happens, nip it in the bud and educate them on, I did not feel comfortable with that. Like that actually, did not make me feel like I could bring my full self to work. These are the reasons why, moving forward, I would really appreciate X, Y, and Z, right? You can respond immediately. But if you're nervous to respond immediately, or maybe you have a lot of emotions going on and you may cuss that person out, right? You may need a little bit of time. You can respond later. You can pull that person to the side, have a one-on-one, and let them know, like, hey, I did not appreciate X, Y, and Z. Moving forward, these are just my expectations, to set boundaries, so that way we could both feel comfortable bringing our full selves to work, because that did not make me feel like I belonged, right? And so speaking up and educating. And I think the same thing is also true for an ally, someone that is not experiencing that, but they're actually witnessing it. You can speak up on that person's behalf. Just because you're not going through it, but you're in that same meeting where that person is creating a psychologically dangerous environment, or making that person feel uncomfortable, you can be an active ally and saying, hey, that was not respectful. Let's make sure that we're maintaining respect here. Or hey, if someone is mansplaining, right, just say Jane Doe said something, and then Tom basically reiterated exactly what Jane said. You can speak up on the behalf of Jane and say, hey, I'm sorry, I think Jane just said that. So I appreciate you, Jane, for what you did. So that's what you can do from the outside looking in, to either speak up, right, and go to HR or whoever to let them know what's been happening, or to educate either immediately or one-on-one to that person, right? And then the other thing that you can do as a supervisor, and this kind of goes back to what I was mentioning before on a leader that talked about like a psychologically safe environment. So the VP of HR that I was supporting, promoting that self-awareness. So you as a leader, making sure that you're vulnerable with your team, making sure you let them know that I'm not perfect, I make mistakes. And so let's kind of go through this journey together. Vulnerability and having that self-awareness allows other people to be vulnerable as well and feel like they can bring their full self to work. The second thing is also, as a leader, being able to ask for feedback and include your team in decision making. So just wanted to reiterate that, because that is really key, like letting the team know that their voices are heard and not just kind of speaking just to speak and check a box, but actually taking their ideas and incorporating them into future decisions. And then the last thing I would say is not pushing blame, but seeking to understand, making sure that you support your team and knowing that they, in order to have that growth mindset and take interpersonal risks, it may come with some mistakes, right? But I'm going to be with you every step of the way as your leader to help you navigate through that so we can make change moving forward. So hopefully that was kind of able to answer some of the questions.
Yeah, no, I think that was great. And I'm thinking too, right, David's earlier point about, particularly for the person who's experiencing it, right, that some people might feel comfortable speaking up in the moment or later, or doing the education, but also we want to really take that pressure off of that person to have to try and fix the systems, right? It's not their fault that the system is broken and deliberately set up to take their power away, right?
Right.
And so I think other options, you mentioned this too, but like boundaries, self-care are really important for people who are experiencing those kinds of situations, right? Like understanding, like, you know what, I just can't, I have a boundary, I just can't engage in this for my own health or well-being, right? And I think this is also where affinity groups can come in, can be helpful for people to connect with other people who might have shared experiences in different ways. And I think David mentioned this before, but like that coalition building as well. And definitely agree with the point of who needs to act and how. I will say, so as a person who tries to be really intentional about my privilege and how to use it, so disrupting things in the moment is so effective, and it really is, and it's almost, now it's kind of like fun for me, right? Because again, like our systems, our conversations are all built to maintain those power differentials, those inequities. And so when you like just put like a pause in it for a second, it really disrupts. So for instance, somebody making some kind of microaggression, and I just jump in and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. I'm sorry, what do you mean? That didn't, can you explain that, right? So
help me understand what you mean.
Yeah, what exactly, to try and make it more, can you be more explicit about your insert here, racism, sexism, whatever it is, right? And so just like a little bit of like a conversation disruptor, or doing what I think your example was great about being like, I just want to make sure everyone realizes that she actually had that idea first. Those can be really effective. I also wonder too, and I know I've talked about this with some of my colleagues, is if somebody wants to be an accomplice and advocate for somebody else, especially if you're going to a supervisor, you probably should have like a side conversation with that person first before you go up there, so that you don't like come in, picture yourself as some kind of like knight in shining armor hero saving the person, right?
Yeah, that's totally true, because if not, that person may be upset with you, right? Because maybe they're not ready, to speak up, or maybe they had other plans on speaking up, but they, needed more time to kind of process through it. So it's definitely good as an accomplice or an active ally to make sure that you're having that conversation with the person before you go to their leader or HR business partner and all of that, because alignment is key, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have just about a minute left. David, do you want to, those different buckets of those different?
Christina was smoking it. Like, I mean, she took all the great ideas. But I do want, I think it's also important to kind of recognize that, there's a way that top down, right? That leaders can kind of think things through in a very critical and deliberate way. And that has to do with institutional change. I mean, fundamentally, one way to think about it, and no one probably wants to think about this, is completely dismantling a system, right? But because the question is always, will change from within really can really make a difference? But I think there's some thought to really reevaluating, like the policies and practices and rules of engagement that are in a corporate business or organization or academia or whatnot, right? And we can start by maybe rethinking simple things like diversity, right? I mean, I am not a fan of diversity and inclusion, and it's not that I'm not a fan of kind of the equity parts of what we're trying to do here, maybe critically, but the words are very ambiguous. Let's be frank and honest with ourselves, right? I mean, what does it mean? What does diversity mean? What does inclusion mean? What does it mean to be called a diverse person? I don't think there's no such thing as a diverse person.
Incorrect
right?
usage of the term, actually.
That's right. I always think that it's also, we have to be careful, because unless we engage in specificity about terminology, right? Are we talking about racial diversity, gender diversity, and ageism? Like, what are we exactly talking about? To just throw the word out there willy-nilly, loosely, is basically it's a equation for disaster. I think it basically opens up to interpretation. I mean, if you look at especially in academia, but also in other organizations, like putting together a diversity office, or the Office of Diversity Inclusion, or what it used to be called multicultural services, is often one that's kind of fraught with very few resources and very few personnel expected to handle this kind of broad word of diversity that has become exceedingly broad, at least since the 20 years that I've studied it, right? And it now includes everything but the kitchen sink. And so when, and it's not to say that, certain things are more important than other, we should be playing oppression Olympics. But when you do that, when you make this kind of laundry list of things, you end up minimizing the importance of kind of long history of gender inequities or racial inequities or other inequities. And the same thing with inclusion. Inclusion is great, but if you drop it top down on something that and you haven't really solved the problem of existing inequalities in that particular location, you're not doing anything. You're really not doing anything. Those inequalities still exist. You're basically saying we're going to be inclusive now with the current structure that is unequal. Right. So you've got to address the underlying problems before you even do that. So I think anyone that's really thoughtful, that says, hey, look, there's a lot of things that we have challenges with, but we need to have a conversation about racial diversity. What does that mean? What does that look like? How can we deal with it? How can we change it? Then we can have another conversation about gender diversity, but we're not going to play this game of this kind of amorphous, ambiguous concepts that are meaningless, that make us feel real good. It's like these diversity workshops that teach about tolerance as opposed to real structural institutional changes. Like, I could care less about tolerance. I could care less that you tolerate me at work and think that I don't belong there, but you're going to be super nice to me, right? So doing those and challenging that kind of structure is probably a good start.
Yeah, and I think that speaks really nicely to what we've seen from the survey that we asked participants to do initially, and some of the comments that are in the chat too, right? Like failed DEI, like how many people in different workplaces can speak to failed DEI efforts at their organization. And to your point, there's lots of reasons why it's failing, but it's because if you're only trying to poke at one part of the system, all the other part of the system is still in place and still reifying that same thing. So yeah, I'm a big fan of imagining new systems, but that is hard work, and it's from the ground up, and it encompasses everything, right? All right, so I think I see Josh has unveiled himself, and I think we're ready for some Q&A with the audience here.
Well, you didn't hear the voice of God earlier, so I figured I'd grace you with my presence now. So thank you for that. So we did have quite a few questions that did come through. So we'll kick this off with a terminology that definitely has found its way into this space and is definitely pretty prevalent at this point. Can the panelists speak a little bit about code switching and how that may or may not play into feeling psychologically safe within the workplace, or psychological danger for that matter?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure.
I just want to make sure I understand.
Yep. So code switching, how does that play into feeling psychologically safe or in a place of psychological danger within the workplace? And I think, David, you kind of alluded to this earlier when you said you couldn't bring your full self to work, and how you had to put on different hats within the dynamic to be inclusive.
That's right,
Or feel like you were part of the inclusive, aspect there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, and I don't want to shirk the question. It's a complicated question, but it has to do with you feeling like you have to be somebody else, right? When you're at a certain place, in order to people please, right? In order to, but again, like, code switching is really prevalent in a place in which you're the only person, or you're one of a very few people, right? You're one of a few people in say a situation that's dominated by others who are say all white men, for example, right? And you feel like you need to kind of but again, code switching is also complicated by perceptions. Like, what does it sort of mean? Like, what are as people sort of regard who they think you are based on these stereotypes and generalizations, you're also playing into this game about how you're trying to be perceived as normal, whatever that means, right? Which is, nothing, it's not really real, but it's real in the consequences. And so you play to that, which unwittingly often means that you're basically giving in to sort of the status quo of what everybody wants, needs, thinks about, right? Or you're remaining silent, right, for fear of. So that's kind of the first general thoughts on the top of my head when I think about that.
No, thank you for that. And I did get a question asking what my reference to the voice of God earlier was. It was because I was originally not going to be on camera and I was just going to be talking over the panelists. So apologies for any confusion that was brought there. The next question comes in, and for those of you that— I was
going to say something really quick.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. So for the code switching, to just simplify it a little bit, like, if you feel like you need a code switch, you're not in a psychologically safe environment. Because if you can't just be yourself and you feel like you got to switch up your voice, switch up your hair, switch up how you dress, switch up your tone, everything like that just to fit in, then you're not in a psychologically safe environment. And you may want to consider, am I going to, change that and kind of bring my full self to work and see how it's perceived? Or should I consider another company? But I just wanted to say, anyone that's code switching, it's not a healthy environment that you're in, or like even creating for yourself, right?
It seems also really connected to codes of what it means to be professional, right? Like at a basic, code switching is changing who you are in different circumstances, or how you present yourself, what you share, how you speak, how you look, right? And I think for the workplace, there's that context of what's professional. And Christina, you were talking about this earlier, right? Of like, oh, your hair is not professional. What does professional mean, right? And because the implication there is it's some kind of like default white straight hair norm or something like that. So those just things, code switching and professionalism in a workplace seem very connected to me.
All right, so the next question we have in the queue here, and for those of you that might follow some career leaders on LinkedIn or any of those type of areas, there's a career coach that's out there, really preeminent voice when it comes to career and the humanity tied to who you are and what you represent within the workplace. The name is Liz Ryan. For those that are out there, she's over 3 million followers. I definitely would recommend giving that person a follow for a little bit to gain some insight. But she just recently posted an interesting question that was tied to this, according to this individual. Let's stop talking about creating psychological safety at work. It's insulting to tell employers that they can create a safety without providing the basic protections other countries require daily. How are you going to feel safe at work when you can be fired at any moment for no reason? So I'll defer to the panel on what their next thoughts are. So I'll repeat the last part here. How are you going to feel safe at work when you can be fired for any moment for any reason? If there are no protections, I guess is the best way to describe it.
I mean, you're hearing silence on my end because because it's a challenge, right? And I'm not in a right to work state. I'm in Connecticut, which is what for on purposes, we believe it or not, is a blue state, right? With union protections, at least at where I work, but I think that's a real challenge. I think that the fear is real, and we shouldn't dismiss it. I mean, I think that good leaders and groups that are serious about like critically engaging in real change ought to consider that.
One thing I'll say, and I apologize if I'm just being very blunt here, but that is just my personality. You don't need a specific employer. Like, if they're not meeting your needs, if they're not making you feel psychologically safe, if you're not able to bring your full self to work, if it's affecting your mental health, your work-life balance, if you fear like that you're going to get retaliated against or fired, that is a hostile work environment. Who wants to wake up to that every day, right? There are millions and millions of other companies that you can pursue. And yes, you know, you can't get hired overnight, right? It takes time. But at the end of the day, don't feel like you need this company. You don't. There are other companies. Make sure that you do your research, you know, whether it's on LinkedIn or just Googling different things. Find research or find companies that have a positive work environment, that are rated as, you know, the top companies to work for based on, you know, them creating, you know, more inclusive environments and things of that nature. There are so many virtual options right now in this virtual world. So if you're in a work environment because it's in this particular state that, you know, like Dave was saying, it's like a red state, or they're very, you know, conservative and not trying to create change, work at a company that is based out of a different state, but they allow virtual options, right? Like, there's the opportunities are limitless, right? And so be able to take advantage of the Great Resignation and be a part of that. Leave that company and go somewhere else that's going to embrace you as an individual, that's going to accept you for who you are, and that's going to let you feel like you could be psychologically safe at work.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, like, there is privilege in being able to leave your job, right? Or to try and find another job. And I'm sure there are lots of people who are enduring harmful scenarios because they're having difficulty leaving their job or finding another job. But I was, as you were talking, I was thinking the same thing about this particular moment that we're in. I think there's been a total shift in, well, there has been a shift in some of the power dynamics, right? That the pandemic has put into relief for many people what kinds of working conditions they will or will not want to tolerate, has opened up new possibilities for different kinds of working scenarios. And so I do think that there is momentum and support in this Great Resignation moment for being able to do a little bit more of that. Removing yourself from the traumatic environment that I hope people are able to capitalize on.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, please. I'm sorry.
I have seen some things in the chat, like, you know, it's not that easy to leave a job. I completely understand that. I'm a career consultant. I hear that all day, every day, right? But that's why if you're struggling with finding another opportunity, maybe you need to check your resume, maybe you have to work on your interview prep, make sure that you're consulting with different professionals that are subject matter experts that can help you navigate that Great Resignation, that can help you navigate how to communicate with your employer to give them a chance to create change. And if they don't, how to navigate out of that and find other opportunities that are more healthy for you. So I would say it is not impossible. It is difficult, right? And it takes time, but make sure that you're really, you know, leaning on those subject matter experts to help you along the way as well.
Yeah, I was going to add quickly. It's something I've given a lot of thought to. Not me personally in terms of leaving UConn, but you know, I think it depends. A lot of it depends on sort of the type of career you want, and the type of job you're in. Being tenured in academia is difficult to leave, right? It is a struggle to begin with that's rife, depending on where you are, with, you know, gendered, racialized, all these other kind of obstacles. To get tenure is a sigh of relief. At the same time, you may be facing hostilities that make you miserable. And to think about, am I able to leave and face the prospects of getting a job where I may not be tenured, and I may even have, it may be easier to get, you know, for me to be, or I may have more psychological dangers, right, in terms of academic freedom. I think those are challenges, but I do love the idea that if you're already in a place that is rife with psychological danger, like, it is really a thought process you have to have, one with yourself, about, are you ready to spend the rest of your career in constant fear and in danger, and possibly risk health, those kind of health consequences and maybe other kind of consequences, or are you, or is that, is that balance just one you're not willing to take, and you're going to try to sort of get something that's better for you because you deserve it, right? But it does depend, and I definitely, sort of, the pandemic has showed us a lot, right, about what people are willing or not willing to sort of take, and we have the data in real time about what happens when we, as a powerful collective, decide we're not going to take any much more of this kind of exploitation that we've been taking, and exploitation in all kinds of manners, which include, being bullied and having those kind of threats. It is something to think about.
Given the amount of time we have left, we are 1 minute over. So I think there's one question here that I'd like to pose to the panel, and then I would sincerely apologize to everybody that we aren't able to get through all of these questions. I think I can speak for the panelists and say that they are willing to continue the dialogue if you wanted to reach out to them on LinkedIn or something to the effect if there are specific things that you think that fall within their realm. But if I can pose to the panel in like a 30-second kind of final thoughts that you have. We talked about, and David, you just kind of alluded to this in terms of continuing the growth and process that we need to kind of create. What are some books or articles that you might recommend if folks want to continue to reiterate, promote, and build on these ideas surrounding psychological safety? If there's one or two things that you can think of off the top of your head, each of you has mentioned some article or literary piece that's out there. So I'm not sure if there's something that you can come off the top of your head now.
The only book that's coming to the top of my mind is called The Memo by Minda Harts. And it's really about challenging women and people of color to have a seat at the table by standing up for themselves, by speaking out on microaggressions and when they're not in a psychologically safe environment. So that's one book that comes to mind, but I can't think of any others right now.
I mean, there's a lot. I wonder, and again, I'll pose this as a question to you, Josh. Maybe is there a way that we can cultivate a list of interesting things that we can put out to the audience or other folks, like on the UConn Foundation, so we have a little bit more time to think about this. Off the top of my head, I think I already mentioned Victor Ray's Racialized Organizations. It's a very hot topic right now, at least in sociology and social sciences, that really sort of have you really thinking about organizational structure. I would recommend, if you're interested in kind of looking at new racism or racialized social systems, Eduardo Bonilla Silva's book, Racism Without Racist, is a good one. But yeah.
No, I think that's a fantastic idea, and I think it's an easy one where we can easily get that list out to folks that have registered for this event. So we can definitely work on that with the panelists and get that back out. Katie, any thoughts immediately to that question, or do you want to wait and we can throw it into any of the follow-ups?
Yeah, no, I would wait. I mean, I think I would always advocate for a consultant like Christina or other people, like I think having an outside perspective and dedicated training and things like that. I sometimes move away from things to read because sometimes I feel like people get caught in things to read and never get to the doing stage. So I think working with somebody, an expert, to help provide resources, but also a plan for action is really important.
No, valid, very valid. I really want to thank you all. I think it's been an incredible discussion today, as you can see from if you're following along in the chat at all. I think the important thing that we've all pulled away, I think in various ways as well, is to understand that while there's a million different facets that this psychological safety can take, it is beyond just the race and racial dialogue. It is to accessibility. It is to race and religion, to gender expression and gender identity, sexual identity, accessibility, and aging. We even talked about, right? We talked about that as well, and I think that's important to remember as well. It's all about belonging and that real intersectional aspect of who we are and the layers that we have as our own identity. I think that's crucial to where this goes, and I think all of you talked about that pretty eloquently today. And thank you for helping us to change the status quo and to implement change where we can here. It's been an intriguing and educational discussion. Thank you to all of you for your time today, for your honesty, and for your challenges as well. We appreciate that. Look for follow-up information from us. We'll work to put that together. You'll get a follow-up survey from us shortly, as well as an email. And then post that, you'll get an additional email. So we have some time to cultivate some resources for you that we can get out to you. So thank you all so much to Katie for moderating. David, thank you for joining us from our own fantastic UConn faculty. Christina, you have been an absolute light as everybody has been shining out here. So they all want more time with Christina. All of you have been fantastic. It's been great working with you all, and we thank you all for your time today. Thank you all for joining us. We have one more Elevate seminar coming up with Elevate, ELLE, supporting women in leadership. So make sure you check that out by visiting foundation.uconn.edu and go to our events calendar and sign up for the last one in the series. Thank you all again, and we'll talk to everybody very shortly. Take care, everybody.